Thank you.
Right, we have an ever-growing list. Councillor Simpson, Cooper, Holst, Newman, Mike Lee, Wayne, Councillor Walker and Councillor Collins and Councillor Darby. So there you are. Councillor Simpson.
I'll sit this one out.
I'll be very quick because I've had a bit more oversight on this. So I just want to say one thing. You are doing very well within the money we give you and what we've asked you to do. So you're tracking very well along that. But what comments could you give us, noting that we're going into a budget discussion next week and then potentially into the long-term plan? What are some of the flags? Because, you know, it actually looks good news, but it's not, with respect.
Big question. Yeah, look, there are a couple of aspects to that. One is the notion of looking backwards into performance. Ultimately, what you've got is a chief executive, an executive team and a lot of staff who actually are given some outcomes to be achieved and a level of money to achieve it. What we're reporting on is, are we delivering within those budget constraints what you've asked to deliver? And I think, yep, performance-wise, it is working very, very well. The big question then is you've got to tackle, and it's really is an LTP process, excuse me, is what level of investment do you want to make going forward? And that's where the true discussions come around. What do you want to achieve and how much will that cost and who's paying? So this is looking backwards. Have we achieved within those parameters you gave us? And it is going very well. As an organisation, we're delivering, matching those outcomes to dollars. Going forward, you have to determine what level of investment do you want to make in the city. And it really is the investment side, I think, is the big discussion piece. But you're going to have more of that with the budget process you're about to get up and then leading into an LTP, which is the really big discussions. The level of investment to make, the outcomes you're going to achieve with that, what level of funding goes with that, and then again the organisation will deliver on that, and the organisation will try and deliver well on that performance based on those parameters. But that's the big discussion.
And just finally, the questions that people are asking are based on the things that they can see very quickly that we have done well and the concerns that people have. So in the report, whilst you know, I think it's really good, and I also support Councillor Watson and his comments. It's great. It's a step up from what we've ever had in council before. But I think that a sort of a cover sheet around the things that we have done well and the things that we haven't done well would be right at the very front as a summary, would be helpful for everybody. And the explanations. Thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. I want to talk about the resource consents and building consents because that's kind of my area and the regulatory area. You've got a comment here that talks about consenting made easy, and I think that speaks to the Mayor's comments about we need to know information, but we do. We've been working on this for the last several years, developing a new program to make this easier and have people more satisfied. So do you think this will start to see some impacts in this area once this fully kicks in? It's automated, it's cutting down a lot of staff time.
Yeah, look, through the chair, consenting made easier fundamentally should improve it because there'll be more clarity about what information is required if you're applying for a consent. And look, it's not in all cases, but in many cases it's actually a bit of to and throwing back and forward about have we got all the information we need to process the consent, and that does create some frustration for our customers. So if it's clarity about what's needed for a consent, then there's an automated process to actually ensure that it's kept in line, it's following process through, people can actually see where they're up to in the consenting stage. That also then flows into the customer service side as far as handling calls and emails about where things up to. So, yep, it should improve. There will be a lead-in time for that to happen, which is why we're not anticipating a lot of improvement in the current financial year up until 30 June. But, yeah, we're anticipating it should improve, definitely.
Okay, so just to note, if you look at the resource consents,
yep.
You know, we're doing over 200 a week. You know, it's pretty massive, isn't it? You know, just think of the kind of work that's being done under the pump of, and if I look at all that regulatory stuff, under the pump of everyone saying, cut your staff. But in these sorts of areas, it's highlighted too by the Mayor that, you know, are we staying safe if we keep, you know, cutting staff in that area? Whereas we're required to employ, and please correct me if I'm wrong, a whole team just to process people requesting legoimas, you know, which really isn't what we're here to do, but we actually have to employ a whole bunch of people to do that, where the money would be better spent on more building inspectors, more inspectors in restaurants and places like that. So it's quite interesting to see. You don't want to cut off people's opportunity to get that information, but it does cost.
And a very general comment. Part of the program that this organisation is moving forward on is the whole transparency piece, which is actually putting information online. So, two advantages. One is it means staff don't have to then compile it and respond to a request.
Yeah.
The other is also we're not pushing information out. When someone wants information, it's available online. They can actually pull it down when they want
Do
it.
you think that will make a cut in the number of, but the resources required ultimately over time?
As far as staff to respond to things, yeah. So online we've now got all contracts let, all suppliers spend over the last 6 months. We've now got the significant Lagoima requests. They go online. Staff numbers and dollars are online, so people can actually draw that down when they want it as opposed to asking for it, which takes resources to respond.
Good, thank you. Thanks very much.
Yes, good points, Councillor Cooper. There's certainly some among us that believe we can just cut things by 10% and everything will be sweet and keep on going. Councillor Hulse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I know you want to keep this brief, but this is such a critical piece of work. My first comment is I'm hoping we could take these measurements that I have to say are getting more accurate, more clearly defined and more useful, and take some serious time going into the LTP to look at this, because this is actually our way of measuring the organisation to say, as we squeeze costs and number of staff, how are we doing as an organisation? Because we cannot, as Councillor Cooper says, expect our popularity and delivery and visual fabulousness to increase in the community when we are squeezing ourselves to the point where we can no longer deliver. So I think this is such a critical piece of work, which is why everyone wants to discuss it. I think the Mayor's absolutely on point when he talks about the issue of understanding where have the government handed us issues to do, we require more staff and more funding, and then we're lagoimed, as Councillor Webster used to say, up the yin-yang about why we've got more staff to deliver something that we are required to do and need to deliver it within certain parameters. So I think we need to start making those points much more clearly, and we need to make them politically, and I cheer the Mayor on. If you wish to wave that flag, we will be behind you 100%. The other issue I'm concerned about is some of our measurements don't tell the full story. Libraries, for instance, I think Councillor Watson's absolutely right raising that, and it is an example of the impact of government changes. So libraries, we are getting people in there much longer. What are they doing? Are they reading books? No, they're not. They're actually on our computers, which is the only access they've got to dealing with their benefits, their job applications, the management of their health data, all of which is now required to be done online. I think we need to send MSD a very nice request to say, we're picking up all of this cost, this time and this funding, please send money. So I think this is time for us to take these measurements, turn them into cold hard data and then actually send the bills. So, Mr. Chair, I do have a question in here. CapEx, we're sitting at 54% after 9 months. And this is just us. I'm sure that Auckland Transport and Watercare will be in the same position. It says to me that we probably do need a bit of a discussion about CapEx and our ability to deliver CapEx and the impact on our debt line. And somewhere this is actually okay. It's completely understandable in the current environment, but how do we unpack this and say, are we being a little bit too enthusiastic and a little bit unrealistic? And how do we actually use perhaps the retooling of that debt line to our advantage to create some capacity for some other work that we need to do? I know that our staff are managing this almost on an hourly basis, but I wonder if we need to bring that to us at a political level and see if we are being as proactive as we could be in this area. So perhaps just a comment on that would be appreciated.
Through the Chair, certainly a very good point to raise, Councillor Hulse. That is a significant component of the work that we'll be doing in the LTP preparation. I think we do, as you rightly note, we do need to have a lot of time and a lot of discussion on that and prioritise where, as Kevin said earlier in response to Councillor Simpson's question, where do you wish to invest?
Yeah, and I guess, Mr. Chair, this is our chance to actually be brave and to tackle some areas where we have perhaps put CapEx, but if we're realistic, some of this isn't actually going to be able to be delivered for 5 years. Let's look at reallocating that. That may not be a popular discussion, but I think we have to be prepared to have it. Thank you, and fantastic work to our staff. Really appreciated.
Councillor Newman.
Thank you. An interesting report, lots of very good information. I have 4 questions that sort of go over the place, but I'll try and keep them succinct. With respect to paragraph 49, if you don't have the numbers now, could you come back to me? So it states 37,538 consented net sections and dwellings. My question is, how many code compliance certificates have been issued for said sections and dwellings?
I'll have to come back to you on that one. So, yep, triple Cs, yes.
Yep, probably the same for the next question at para 50. What was the raw number of building consent applications that were not processed within 20 working days? And if you have a breakdown of what was the length of time taken beyond the 20 working days, you might want to break that down to cohorts. So I'm happy to put that in writing. A question for Manoj with respect to Lagoimas. How many requests were not responded to within 20 working days, and how many Lagoima requests were then referred to the Ombudsman? Have you got any idea on that?
I can get back to you on that.
Okay. And my last question with respect to Veolia, actually. Look, can you give me some advice as to how our organisation monitors and reports the operating performance of Veolia? I know that we've got Watercare coming. They're a water organisation, but Veolia has the franchise contract for Papakura. It's quite hard to get some exposure to their operational performance. I'm drilling on that all the time, looking at their consent and whether they're complying with it. I would like the organisation to be working with me on that.
So just to check the question, that's performance against the consent requirements as opposed to its operational commercial performance?
I have performance against the consent. I'll be talking to Patricia Reid in terms of customer management, interface with the call centres. There's a lot of issues that I have with Veolia. I'm happy to come and talk to you about that. But there's a blind spot there. It's called Papakura and parts of Franklin, where my constituents require a comparable level of service from the organisation that has the contract for decades, and I think Auckland Council needs to ensure that we are achieving a comparable level of service for those customers. So let's talk offline.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. Councillor Lee, Mike.
Thank you. I want to go to section 65, 66 and 67, which relate to our library service. Normally, libraries are very non-controversial, and they're very much the council's quiet achievers. And as I understand, our library service is the biggest in the Southern Hemisphere, so it's very important. So I want to refer to the graphs, the figures on 65 and 66 and the table 67 and how they relate, because I don't think they are as legible as they could be. I note that the only mention of books in the report is e-books and audiobooks, but there's no mention of books, which, looking at the table 66, would appear to be in the lighter green column. But it would be good, as we have in the table 67, it would be good to get the numbers of books borrowed and other what you call physical issues, to get that breakdown. Also, the histogram is sort of a little bit misleading with the sudden dive from a year end to a quarter end. I don't think that assists legibility. It's misleading, really, because with a line going down, it implies that there is a decline in use. in terms of visits to library facilities per capita, that's all very fine, but it would be good to get actual visits. If I could go back, if I could go on to 68, which is the rolling 10-year return for diversified financial assets. I'm just trying to relate the 9.6 to the 6.8. Could you, and the 7.82, the different numbers, could you explain them?
Sorry, you're looking at the... Sorry, I was just checking on the library just to see, because some of this, can I just jump back to the libraries if I may? Some of the numbers you actually asked for in the histogram, we might just make it clear in a table then. For instance, the physical books as opposed to the e-books, the histogram, as you mentioned on 66, has actually got those numbers there. So the 1.7 is, unfortunately, it's covered by the tick, the forecast. But the Q3, the 10.2 is the physical books, 10.2 million versus 1.2 million e-books on 66.
Yeah, all the emphasis seems to be on e-books, but that's very much a minority taste. And according to librarians, the demand for e-books in the UK and the USA is falling off, and there's a resurgence in books.
Yeah, and both are shown there, but yeah. Sorry, now just moving on to your next question. So under 68, you were asking about the return on portfolio.
There's a 9.6, and then in the explanation, there are other figures. Return on the portfolio was 6.8 compared to the reference portfolio 7.82, and then we've got a 9.6. So how does that work out?
Okay, yeah, so the 6.8 is the actual return, and what we do is we actually measure that against where the market return would actually be for a similar type of portfolio. So it's slightly under, that's the 7.82, we actually achieved 6.8. But that's just in relation to the same providers that have been providing the service, managing the fund on our behalf for the last several years. The 9.6, I'd have to check on that. That's a rolling basis, which I think is just a timing difference between those two. But I can actually I'll come back explicitly and state that. It
would be good to get some real figures in there as well, like how much money that means to the council. I would note that our returns seem to be significantly above the amount of money we're paying on interest for borrowing. So I'll leave it at that. Can I just make one more point, if I could? At the highlights and achievements section 3, there's much emphasis on the public opening of the lighthouse, formerly the State House, which is all well and good. It gets another mention as a highlight, but there's no mention of things like the Lindau exhibition. See, as far as I know, the lighthouse was something provided by Barfoot and Thompson Limited, not really Auckland Council, but the Lindau exhibition in the Auckland Art Gallery.
Yeah, this is an Auckland RFA here. Maybe Sir Don will mention the Lindau exhibition.
The Lindau exhibition doesn't get any mention at all.
RFA, this is an Auckland Council.
No, sorry. The lighthouse, Barfoot and Thompson is not owned by the council, is it? But then there's the Lantern Festival.
Yep, your question is...
Which is probably one of the most, the biggest Chinese festivals outside of Asia, and supported by thousands of New Zealanders of all ethnic groups and ages. No mention of that. No mention of the opening of the Parnell Heritage Station. Anyway, I'll just make it. It's an interesting, it's revealing on what staff consider are popular and what is really popular.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. So, Councillor Walker, so we're actually running half an hour behind time, which is fine because it's all good questions. So we have Councillor Walker, Collins, Darby and Sayers, and perhaps that will be it. To the point, Councillor
got some questions.
You went there, neither was
the first one is around employee numbers, which is something that we come in for a lot of flack for. It would be very constructive if we could show the numbers in a graphical or histogram form over time, because then it would be apparent to people that our relative employee numbers are actually going down. So graph form, easy to understand. If we could have that, that'd be great.
Yep, taken on board, good point.
I am concerned about the environmental performance of council, and I'm referring to 63, particularly around our catchments and our waterways, and similarly under stormwater in terms of the ratio length of watercourse consented, physically improved versus degraded. So I really just wanted to highlight those issues, and I would suggest that where there are issues that we are not performing in the environmental area, if there could be some commentary, it would be useful. Obviously, I've got a question as to why we're suffering in that area. I don't want an answer to that now, but I'm sure some officers will be able to get back to me. It is of concern.
Councillor Walker, wouldn't that get greater amplification in Councillor Holz's committee?
Absolutely, and I will be
This is
amplifying it
just a
there.
concise report, and we're trying to
I
keep
understand
it
that.
concise.
And coming back to...
Sorry, just to add to the chair, if you do look at 63, there's lots of greens there.
Yeah.
The 3 reds that you completely pointed out all have commentaries underneath in the footnotes.
Sure.
But it may be they don't go far enough for what you'd like.
The other issue that I've got that I just put up
Long as a piece of string.
as a question that we report on under solid waste. Sure, we report on domestic, but we know that by far and away the biggest part of the waste stream is commercial and industrial waste, which is going up, and we should be reporting on that. It's also an economic indicator in some respects. The other area that concerns me is the point that the Mayor was making around issues to do with capacity constraints, and that's noted under 42. I would suggest, and I don't know really how to express it as a question, that we have more drill-down information on that issue on an ongoing basis. So we've got some comparative statistics or analysis going forward, because it's a real issue of concern for us.
Yeah, good question.
That covers me off. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Chair, and my apologies for lateness this morning. I just have a couple of queries. In the Appendix 3, you've got the amount that's gone to consultancy, and in that box, one of the areas is design and research work, expertise in managing specific initiatives and projects. That I kind of get the wider scope of that, but I'm really interested in whether or not you would consider that the reason we're getting consultancy services in relation to research work is because it is over and above and beyond the scope of a unit like REMU, whose work is peer reviewed, I understand, which makes it academically rigorous. And I know that there have been reports that have come to the council on a number of occasions from independent researchers that isn't reviewed by academic institutions, so I'm just wondering why we wouldn't use REMU.
Yeah, through the chair, REMU does a lot of research on its own, but it also becomes a coordination point. It actually draws in research from a multitude of sources, some academic, some others. So yeah, part of that fee will actually be paying those other parties for the information they have. Yeah.
Item 48 is the percentage of high-risk alcohol premises inspected. I have inspected annually. Just 2 parts to this question. Firstly, it says the high-risk alcohol premises that are inspected annually, and then it talks about the centre focuses on quarterly blitzes. So would that be suggesting that these high-risk premises are being checked more than once within the year?
I'll have to check on that, but my understanding is no, it is generally annual reviews, but what they're doing is on a quarterly basis they go out and do major efforts of inspections, but not doing the same one 4 times a year, no.
And part 2 to that would
Check
be
on that.
your office would have it, would be able to guide us on where those high-risk alcohol outlets would be geographically?
They can provide that, yes. You'd like to see that?
Yes, yes, I would, please. And finally, sir, on point 65, which is the libraries, it says in the sentence, after saying that there's a decline in visitor numbers, and it gives a final sentence of this reflects a significant customer shift towards digital borrowing, and the only libraries that aren't experiencing a similar decline are Otahu, Devonport, Te Aratu, Ranui and Waiheke. I'm interested in that because I know that at Tupu Library there was the incident where there was a leak. The leak affected computers and that resulted in a decline. And I'm just wondering if we're going to get more analysis on it, because I think it's a very broad sweeping comment just to say that it's in relation to e-book takeouts rather than some obvious decline that has come as a result of other things.
Yes. Look, I refer to the Chair's comment earlier on. This is quite a high-level overview document. It's not, that's not the only reason, the factor driving to that. It reflects that significant, and it is a significant influence. 11% of borrowing now being e-books does drive that in a major way, but definitely not the only cause, no.
Excellent.
You're
Thanks,
right.
Chair.
Right, Councillor Darby.
Good. My question relates to the Treasury report on, what is it? Page 31. And it relates more directly to the issue of resale and wholesale bonds. And I've just noticed the Auckland Council Investor Update, which is issued annually when we go off internationally looking for those that might want to lend to us. And I look at this section that says strong credit rating. Lenders have a charge over current and future rates income. Rates rank above all other claimants. I really want to understand the implications of that. I gather that the investment package is made very attractive because of that, that you rank ahead of banks calling in mortgages or court decisions or anything else. I probably want to know what that means for ratepayers, and are our ratepayers fully aware of what that means? So can we just have a brief explanation of what the scenarios might be where a international wholesale bond lender might have a claim above bank mortgages and high court claims and everything else on the ratepayer? Does it imply that that claim can be on also land and building assets of the ratepayer?
Through you, Mr Chair, probably best I take that question rather than Kevin. Firstly, the security that's offered to all investors, whether they be a bond holder or one of our banks within the syndicate that provides the committed but undrawn standby facility, is a debenture trust deed. And within the debenture trust deed is the security, is that it is the charge over the current and future rates revenue. What that means is it doesn't mean that that an investor can claim against a ratepayer or a property, to your question. The reason that we make the distinction that rates rank above all other claims in a property is that is prescribed under the rating legislation in New Zealand, which is very, very different to offshore jurisdictions. In many offshore jurisdictions, the secured creditors rank in the traditional order of taxation authorities, secured lenders, maybe court claims, and there is no surety of any rating there as well. So the reason we make that comment is to make sure that it is very clear the difference between legislation under which we operate in New Zealand and those other jurisdictions. It gives the investor more confidence that the cash flow of Auckland Council that underpins really our debt servicing obligations for the investment that they're making is actually very, very strong.
So it's a standard procedure for local government New Zealand raising international bonds. Any council entity in New Zealand would have this proviso in their contracts.
That is correct. Their security that they offer may be slightly different. We are the only local government organisation in New Zealand that is allowed to borrow offshore in our own name. The local government funding agency does borrow offshore, but they borrow in New Zealand dollars. We are able to borrow in other currencies as well.
Okay. Just final question. Are we confident that ratepayers know the extent of that claim? Do we communicate that? Because it's quite a call-in procedure.
Again, through the Chair, the impact of that claim, that the rates rank above all other claims on a property, is well understood by ratepayers. It is also well understood by anybody who is borrowing off a bank secured by way of residential mortgage. It is very, very clear in your loan agreements.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Mr Chair. My question's directed to page 17 around the resource consenting, but I would like to acknowledge and reinforce the sentiments of some of the other councillors, Kevin, to you and your team, about the increased detail in the report, and particularly what's striking is the insight into the different areas of council. So thank you for that. So my question's just trying to flesh out a little bit more around this Consenting Made Easy program and the related mobile technology rollout with it. Obviously there's an IT budget associated with it, Kevin. I don't know if you have the numbers, but I'd be interested to know what that budget is and how we're tracking to it. That's question number one. Question number two is, have we got any comment back from the building inspectors, our staff themselves, about how they're finding the wind out of that program?
Right, yeah, again, a few component part. When we talk about the whole notion of consenting made easy through to new core, through to scheduling tools for our building inspectors, through to mobile devices, it's hard to segregate between what's related to resource consents because it's becoming the way we just operate now. It's the tools are there, the system underlying. For instance, we don't have a single system for resource consenting. The information you held for that purpose is now part of a general property and customer interface, which actually serves for animal control, for rating purposes and everything else. So, fundamentally, new core is that massive database. So it's very hard to itemise specific costs for those sort of initiatives. The ICT budget is performing within budget. So yes, we are achieving the outcomes there. We've reported back on some of the significant projects in the past. The rollout, somebody else may be able to advise, might be able to get back to you on that one, but I know the click scheduling, which is the key tool to enable inspectors to be based on a mobile basis from different locations, I didn't think that was fully rolled out yet, so I don't know if we've got any comment back on that yet. But we do know that it will enable much more. On average, they're expecting 10 inspections a day as opposed to 8, where you have to come to a home base, pick up a car, pick up a schedule of inspections, then go out and start your work. By actually making it more mobile, by having a scheduling tool on a mobile device, it'll increase it by, like I say, from 8 to 10 inspections a day, which is much more better for the customer as well as for productivity.
Okay.
Yeah. So sorry, not specific answers to your questions, but more of a general one, hopefully.
Yeah, okay. Thanks.
Right, excellent, councillors. As the report's improved, so do the questions. So very good.